It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Curt Stager. Now, Curt is, what a resume here. He's an ecologist, a paleoclimatologist, a science journalist with a Ph.D. in biology and geology from Duke University. Go Blue Devils. He has published over 36 peer-reviewed articles in major journals, including Science and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and has written extensively for general audiences in periodicals such as National Geographic, the New York Times, Fast Company, and Adirondack Life. Before he comes up, we're going to watch this film entitled The Age of Humans. Okay. And then the film? Okay, no problem. You ready to come to the stage, Curt? Come on up. Dr. Curt Stager, everybody.
Oh, that's okay. Right here. Yeah, there you go. Sounds good. Thanks. All right. Hello, everybody. You're going to hear some hard science today. I'll do a little bit of it. This afternoon, you'll also be hearing more detail on the future of snow around the world, but including here from Natalie Knowles and others who've done some amazing work like that. My colleague Brendan Wilsey from Paul Smith College is going to talk about ice in the North Country too. I'm going to do a little of that, and I mean hard science in both ways. You know, it's hard facts and research and things like that, but it's hard information to hear sometimes, and it's easy to shy away from that. And I'm glad you're willing to listen to it because it's important. There's a great saying that I like to live my life as a scientist by. It comes from Thomas Henry Huxley, a scientist in the 1900s, who said, we have to learn what is true in order to do what is right. So even if it makes us a little uncomfortable, we really need to know the facts in order to tell what to do about them. And I'd like you to look at these things you're going to hear today, the little bits I'll give you here, what you'll hear in the afternoon, as the raw material for the important stories that we just heard about from people like Graham. So I'm going to do about 15 minutes of introduction of some of the research I've been doing here in the Adirondacks, just to bring this global picture down to the local level, which is very important to do because it shows you why it matters to us personally when it happens where you live. But then I want to take the next step and say, not only what have we learned is true, but what do we do about it? How do we do what is right? And so Graham hinted at this, and so did Bill McKibben, if you heard his keynote address. The best thing we can do is not to just say, what can I do as an individual for this? Don't be an individual. Work as a group, work as a team. And so what I'd like to do in the middle part of this presentation is give you the story of an alliance that I've made as a scientist and educator in the formal settings of a college, a small college, Paul Smith's College, just down the road, and making alliances with amazing experts in what we call informal education or outreach that can really amplify the message as well. So I'd like to start with a quick introduction of some of the science of what we've been doing here at Paul Smith's College. Show a film that I've made in collaboration with the Wild Center in Tupper Lake. And I'm going to introduce one of the most amazing members of that group here in just a minute. And then I'll open up for question and answer after that. So I think one of the other great things that Bill McKibben said with such powerful words was when we're facing resistance from the fossil fuel industry to make the switch to sources of energy that don't warm the planet. When we face huge numbers of dollars aiming at denial and slowing things down. Bill says, remember that the only thing more powerful than lots of money is lots of people together that are organized. And that's really the theme of this whole presentation here, is that we're in a new stage of Earth history and self-awareness of who we are as a species. Earth scientists are calling this the latest chapter in Earth history, to go with the age of ice and the age of dinosaurs and things. This is the age of humans, the Anthropocene epoch, when we're discovering through the sciences what traditional peoples have known all along, that we're not only a part of nature, but we're actually becoming a force of nature. And you'll hear an argument for that in the film. So to communicate and join up as a team, as a species, as a force of nature, that's how we have to solve these problems. And so this will be the story of one example of a productive alliance. So to set the stage for this, I want to tell you a little bit about Paul Smith College, where I've been for 35 years or something like that, since 1987 anyway. It's a beautiful campus in the wilderness, about a half-hour drive west of here. It's got a lake and mountains and forest all around it. We use the outdoors as our classrooms and our laboratories. We do natural sciences, forestry, and other programs as well. We have the best snow for biathlon and cross-country skiing in our backyard at the visitor center. But our main thing is making direct personal connections between the people who study at the college and the natural world around us. And so one example that I'll be drawing from is long-term monitoring of the animals, plants, and ecosystems around the campus that we build into our science classes. So the introductory biology class, we go outside and we monitor lake temperatures, plankton, plants, and animals. The climate class in the spring monitors when do the robins come back? When do the flowers open up in the spring in the woods? When do the native bees come out of their burrows in the ground where they spent the winter? When do the spotted salamanders migrate across the road to their breeding pools in the spring? And so we bring the concepts to life by going out and actually seeing this stuff, but then we keep the observations and the measurements and develop a long-term monitoring program out of that. And our data now go back 30 years, which is amazing. So when you want to do climate studies and the ecological effects, you need long-term data of like 30 years at least. So I considered that to be a ripe fruit. After 30 years of data, I said it's time to publish it. So in addition to other stories that I've collected around the region, from ice out contest data to people's garden journals, also keeping track of when the flowers open up and things like that, and combining it with the best weather records we have from local climate stations. We published the results. It's in the journal PLOS Climate, PLOS Climate, came out last year. And we basically summarized the results of the spring observations with the students, but also the weather and the other stuff. So to give you the highlights of it, or the lowlights, it's warming here, no surprise, but it's faster than the global average over the last century, mostly in winter. So winter is becoming shorter and milder, summers are becoming longer and hotter. We see that the lake is warming significantly over the time of our studies. We found that the species, the robins, the bees, the flowers, the trees, respond sensitively to the temperature. So in springs, when spring comes earlier than average, they come out and do what they do earlier as well. But we also found that they have different sensitivities. And so as it warms, we expect in the future that the animals and plants who normally coordinate when they come out in the spring may actually mismatch in terms of time when they come out in the spring as it warms, because they respond in different ways. So anyway, that's kind of the standard academic role that a scientist and educator might have. This is where formal education sort of stops. The goal is to teach with what you find and do some creative education, which we do so well at Paul Smith's, and then publish your results in a technical journal article. And then you sort of let it sit there, and maybe a few academics look at it, right? But we can do more than that. One thing is, I've been blessed with a wonderful alliance with Caroline Lucy, a former winter athlete, co-owner of the Crowne Plaza Resort here, philanthropist and great friend of Paul Smith's College, has endowed a lot of my research so that we can publish this and bring students out into the wild and disseminate this as best we can. So if anybody out there in the room or online is a potential donor, Scientists really need that kind of help because it's hard to get grants for local scale community-based studies. So this has really helped, so thank you very much, Caroline, for that. But if you want to amplify your outreach and help do what is right, you can reach out for help to another branch of outreach and education, not the formal education where people are trapped in a classroom, but informal education like this, where if you're boring, people can leave, right? So there are techniques to help you, and there are amazing professionals out there that you can make a powerful alliance with as an academic. So I want to introduce the alliance that I've been so fortunate to have with the Wild Center, collaborating with them and Paul Smith's College to do climate communication classes, co-taught with me and experts at the Wild Center, also the Youth Climate Summit movement and others. And so I'm going to ask Jen Kretzer to come up and just tell us a little bit about some of those amazing things they do with youth. If you don't know her already, she's the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center in Tupper Lake. So many awards, I can't even go into them all, but just last year, the Adirondack Council gave her Conservationist of the Year Award. I was disappointed. I thought it should have been Conservationist of the Century in the entire universe. Recognized by the White House for the youth activism she does and with students, of taking students overseas to the COP meetings, and has launched this amazing youth climate movement. So Jen, if you wouldn't mind filling people in on this, and then maybe we'd lead into this film that we've made together.
Thank you so much, Curt. I'm really pleased to be here. Hi, everybody. Again, my name's Jen Kretzer. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center, and maybe some of you were able to join us last night for our winter soiree. Do I see a show of hands that were able to come? Awesome. Thank you for being there. So I wanted to share just a little bit about what, sort of the role of informal ed in the idea of connecting with partnerships and as well as communicating about climate change. So this is, maybe you have not heard this statistic before, but informal education, cultural institutions like the Wild Center, which would include museums, zoos, and aquariums, see about 850 million people each year across the United States. That's more than any sporting event combined. It's more than anything. It's one of those, there are places in almost every city, many communities across the country, and in many parts of the world where you can find a museum almost anywhere, or a zoo, or an aquarium. So we have this opportunity, this network, to provide an incredible platform for scientists, for opportunities for people to talk about climate change and communicate about climate change in compelling ways. And the other thing about cultural institutions is that they have a very high degree of public trust. So there's been a lot of research done looking at the way people perceive and learn about science and where their public trust lies. And actually, science centers like the Wild Center are in like the 75th percentile, way more than government entities, more than academic institutions. Like it's pretty remarkable. So that gives us this really unique position of being able to take work like what Curt has done through Paul Smith's College and amplify it in a way to the general public. So this partnership that we created with Paul Smith's College and working with Curt was taking the work that he was doing and putting it on a platform that could be communicated out to the world. So not just from our museum, but we're hoping to, make this movie more widely available so that everyone has a chance to see and connect with it. The other thing about this work that I find really exciting, and Graham spoke to a bit too, which was very compelling, is this idea of both storytelling and storytelling about place. So one of the things I think is also very compelling about the film is this idea that it's grounded in this place, in the Adirondacks. So that communication piece that's connecting with people, making the climate change impacts more relevant and meaningful. We know that people are the scale's really starting to tip towards towards people really understanding that climate change is happening, it's happening now, and they're concerned about it and even alarmed about it, but oftentimes it's still seen as something that's happening somewhere else. So what we want to do is make sure that people understand that climate change is happening in the here and now, and it's happening right where you live, wherever you live. There are things that are, the world is changing, it's a changing place. So this film allows us to understand the impacts of climate change happening in the Adirondacks, and also provides a sense of hope and inspiration of what we might be able to do collectively together. So the Wild Center really saw our role in this as being a platform for communication, and the film is an opportunity to combine with both our youth climate work, which I spoke about last evening, which connects with young people around the world, our new climate solutions exhibit, and our other green initiatives across our campus, to provide that grounding in place here in the Adirondacks to understand the science and impacts of climate change, and then actually to do something about it. And it's an amazing opportunity to work with Curt and Paul Smith College to form this unique partnership. We don't have the expertise or this on staff that Curt can bring, and then we can elevate that to a much broader audience. So we were thrilled to have this partnership, and we're really so happy to have the film now available at our museum, and we're going to show it here today. Thanks, Curt.
All right, thank you. So Pepe, let's let it roll. The Earth has seen a lot of changes in its long history. Back in the Mesozoic era, we had the age of dinosaurs. In the Pleistocene epoch, we had the age of ice, when great ice sheets crushed entire landscapes. Today, we're in a new chapter of Earth history, where we've become so numerous, our technology so powerful, and our lives so interconnected globally, that we've become a force of nature on par with asteroids and ice ages. Scientists are coming up with a name for this new chapter in Earth history centered on human beings. It's called the Anthropocene epoch, which translates to the age of humans. One of the biggest changes we're making now in the age of humans is we're changing the chemistry of the atmosphere in ways that are changing the climate of the entire planet. There's a very strong scientific consensus based on many lines of strong scientific evidence that we are the dominant force behind climate change during the last half century. There's a lot of complicated science behind that, but basically, what you really need to know about it comes down to three things. One, it's real. Two, it's us. And three, it's here. It can be hard to believe that small people like us can change an entire atmosphere when we walk outside and look up at the deep blue sky, and we wonder, how can I change a limitless expanse like that? But if you step back and look at the world as a whole and see the Earth from space, as we can do now, we can see that the atmosphere is actually a thin blue layer, kind of like the skin on a grape. There isn't that much to it, really, when you look at the big picture. And so it makes it easier to grasp on the gut level that by releasing the fumes of our fossil fuels into it continuously year after year, we can change the chemistry of it. Scientists are also studying where that carbon dioxide goes. It doesn't all just stay in the atmosphere. A lot of it dissolves in the ocean because gases dissolve in water, and oceans cover most of the planet. So just as oxygen dissolves in water and keeps fish alive, the carbon dioxide that we release dissolves into the oceans and changes their chemistry. It makes them closer to the acidic condition. which can have serious consequences for corals and other marine life that has hard parts made out of limestone. It's called ocean acidification. It's another carbon dioxide problem we face. But when we focus on climate change, we're talking about the atmosphere, of course. We can measure the amount of carbon dioxide in the air that we've released to mingle with the natural carbon dioxide of the atmosphere using tracers. They're called isotopes. They're kind of like radio tagging individual molecules as if they were wildlife. That about 1 in 8 of the carbon dioxide molecules floating in the atmosphere and in every breath we take, about 1 in 8 of those came from a smokestack or a tailpipe, no matter where we go in the world. But that doesn't just change climate, it changes the fabric of life on Earth. Plants use carbon dioxide for food. They draw it from the air through their leaves, they weave it into the tapestry of their bodies, their leaves, their sap, their fruits, their seeds. And so every plant on Earth, every blade of grass and every tree that you encounter also contains carbons from smokestacks and tailpipes, which then goes through the food chains with the food we eat, the plants we eat, the animals that eat those plants, and if we eat products from them. Basically, the food we eat contains this carbon too, which of course means that the very bodies that we live with contain fossil fuel carbon. 1 in 8 of the carbon atoms in your body came from a smokestack or a tailpipe. To put this in other words, we're not only a source of air pollution, we are air pollution. Now, this can be a disturbing realization, of course, right? But there's an amazing insight that comes with that. It basically means that science is showing us things that people have known in other cultures through the ages, that we're not separate from nature, we're part of nature, not just in an abstract form, but from the actual elements from which our bodies are made. We're closely tied to and deeply embedded in the natural world, and that's why we're having the effects on it that we are. So to continue, we know it's real. We know it's us. Well, there are ways we know it's us. One of them is that we study the natural cycles of climate around the world by looking at layers of sediment under lakes and oceans, by looking at the growth rings in trees, by looking at the snow layers in ice cores. And when we do that, we can see that yes, climate has always changed naturally and there are natural cycles. But not a single natural cycle accounts for what's been happening in the last half century. It's something unique that isn't being repeated. It's something new in the world that coincides with the releasing of fossil fuel emissions. Another way to look at this is by simple bookkeeping. We can just ask ourselves what in the universe is strong enough to change the climate of an entire planet. Well, here there are only really 3 things: the sun, volcanoes, and fossil fuel emissions. And we've been studying those things very carefully over the last half century as well. And so we can account for what's been going on with those 3 and see if it matches up with the warming that we're seeing. Well, the sun has not been doing anything particularly unusual in the last half century, so we can scratch that off the list. The volcanoes of the world do release carbon dioxide themselves, and that can be a heat-trapping gas. But the volcanoes haven't been doing anything unusual either in the last half century that would account for the warming that we see. The only source left standing is the burning of fossil fuels. And we've been measuring that carefully enough that we can see that it matches up with the rise of carbon dioxide in the air and the warming of the planet. So there are multiple lines of evidence that show us that it's us. It's from the burning of fossil fuels, in the vehicles we drive, in the coal-fired power plants that make the electricity, let's say. Basically, so many aspects of our civilization that depend on this non-renewable energy source that's also polluting the planet and changing the atmosphere. To put this in another perspective, to show what a powerful force of nature we've become, If you look at how much carbon dioxide we release over the course of a year around the whole world, it's 100 times more than all the world's volcanoes combined. So in the age of humans, we're realizing that we're not only part of nature, we're a force of nature. So let's continue. We know it's real. We know it's us. We also know that it's here. It's not just something happening far away to other places and other people. Right here in the Adirondacks, we can see the signs of this change too. When we look at the weather records from the area, we see clear evidence of the warming over the last century, and especially the last half century, just as the planet is doing. Basically, we can feel it on the ground as a change of the seasons. We're getting shorter, milder winters and longer, hotter summers. We can see signs of this happening around us, even if we don't follow thermometers and data charts and such. People, for example, watch when the ice goes out in the spring from the lakes, or when the lakes freeze up in the fall. And we see the shortening of winter in the change of the ice on our lakes. One of our longest records of that comes from Lake Champlain. It goes back more than 2 centuries. And we can see with that during the entire 1800s, there were only 3 winters when the main basin of Lake Champlain didn't freeze completely in winter. Now it's become more and more common during the last half century especially, that it's now normal for Lake Champlain's main basin not to freeze over completely in winter. At Paul Smith's College, where I teach, we've been monitoring when the robins come back in spring, when the spotted salamanders migrate at night to their breeding pools in the woods, when the bees come out of the ground, when the red maples open up. We've been doing that since 1990, and we see that most of those are doing what they do earlier in the spring as the world warms. We also watch what's happening in the fall when the greatest warming is actually happening. At the college, we have students who go out on a regular basis and measure the temperature of the lake, as well as the plankton in the lake. And again, we see that the warming of the atmosphere is reflected in the warming of the surfaces of the lake, which has profound effects on the ecology of the lake. We also see, as the world warms, and there's more evaporation from the oceans and more moisture goes into the air, and the air becomes more energetic with that heat energy, that rainstorms are becoming stronger on average as well. So when we get our big heavy rainstorms now, the heaviest of those are heavier than they used to be in the past. And that's a pattern that we see around the world too. In addition to the warming, it's been getting wetter on average here in the Adirondacks. We see that in the lakes as well, even without rain gauges. Lakes are like natural rain gauges, and you can see that the level of the lakes has risen over time if you look carefully at a lake that you know. You can look around the edges of the lake and see that the roots of trees grow down into the water. And of course, trees don't sprout underwater. So that can tell you that the water has come up since the trees took root. In Bear Pond near Paul Smith's College, we have a small island that used to be in the middle of the lake and is now submerged. There was even a tree growing out of the top of it, which has now been drowned. And there's even a no camping sign still attached to the old tree trunk for the island, which is now underwater. Again, showing that the lake levels have come up. So to sum this up, here in the Adirondacks, what we're basically seeing is a shrinking of winter and milder conditions. We're seeing a lengthening of summer and warmer conditions. One way to look at it is the climate of the Adirondacks is becoming more like the climate of the Blue Ridge. And we can ask ourselves, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, for those of us who live here and love the Adirondacks, we think, well, yes, the Blue Ridge is a beautiful place. The mountains aren't going anywhere. There's plenty of nice forests down there. But it's not the Adirondacks. It's winter that really makes the Adirondacks so unique compared to these other places. The cultures of the people who live here also are closely tied to winter. And we see, for example, the rich heritage of the winter sports industry here. We've had Winter Olympic Games. We've got the Winter Carnival in Saranac Lake. We've got the snowmobile mecca in Old Forge. In one way, we could say that where we live defines who we are, and winter defines the North Country here in the Adirondacks. So we're changing the cultures as well as the ecology and the climate. So when we face these realities, and it's important to do so, it can be tempting to curl up in a ball and say, this is too much for me to handle. I want it all to go away and I'm going to ignore it, or everything is lost. That's actually not the best response we can have. In the age of humans, we have become a force of nature. The things that we're seeing going on now were done inadvertently. As we become aware of our role as a new force of nature on Earth, we see that we have the power now, combined with the knowledge based on good science, to do better and make the world a better place to live in as well. It helps to look at success stories that show us that we can do it. There's large-scale action we can take and small-scale personal action. On the large scale, we can look for success stories like, for example, acid rain. Whatever happened to acid rain? Well, we don't hear about it so much anymore because years ago, when it was acidifying the lakes in the Adirondacks and damaging the forests in the Adirondacks, we had good science investigate it, and we had strong, powerful legislation to change it and cut back on the pollution coming from the burning of fossil fuels. And as a result, the air has cleared, and many of the lakes and forests are now recovering, so we don't even hear about acid rain anymore. But it's important to remember that it's a success story, and it shows that we can work together on the large scale to solve problems like this. But of course, on the personal scale, it's also important. We can ask ourselves, well, what can I do as a single individual? Well, we could say maybe changing a single light bulb or something like that won't necessarily change the world right away. But it changes us when we do that kind of a thing. It helps remind us of the big issues that are going on now, that it's the age of humans. It can help us feel like we're part of a solution rather than just part of the problem. But there's another reason as well. In the age of humans, when we become a force of nature, we also have a sphere of influence. People hear what we say, they see what we do. And so the effects of our own personal choices and lifestyles can have effects much larger than ourselves. And that's the key to success for these kinds of ways of finding better lifestyles in the age of humans. I'd like to congratulate you on being a force of nature. Here in the age of humans, it's an amazing, important chapter of Earth history in which to be alive. We need to switch as quickly as possible from fossil fuels to more sustainable, cleaner sources of energy that we can run our civilization on, so that we can have a longer, better future and live in the world in a much healthier, positive way that can echo on down through the generations. It's also important to realize that a lot of young people today see this as the great challenge of their generation. And one of the great sources of inspiration for me is the Youth Climate Summit programs, which began in the Wild Center and are spreading around the world. I encourage you to learn as much as possible about those and support young people in their efforts to make the world a better place. It's also important to learn about these things, to stand up for the good science and understand our connections to the natural world. So in closing, I'd like to say, we're a force of nature. We can do this. Welcome to the age of humans. So I agree with everything that guy said. Yeah, so I thought we would do some informal Q&A if you have any questions. I do want to say that I was thrilled when I listened to Bill McKibben's keynote the other night, and he brought up this new movement for old folks like me called the Third Act. So we're not leaving the young people to do all the heavy lifting here. So I'd encourage you to look that up. There's actually an event planned for March 21st. They're calling it 3-2-1-2-3, so you can remember it easily as a palindrome. But it's basically drawing attention to the major banks that are funding the fossil fuel industry. So that's out there too. Definitely hook up, and welcome to the age of humans. So Jen and I are both here if you have questions for either of us.
It's on. Good morning, everyone. My name is Benita Law Jow. I'm a board member for the Adirondack Park Agency. I'm an outdoor Afro leader. It's a national organization that gets people of color into the outdoors. I grew up in New York City, and as a person of color, this is really important to me, but I find that a lot of my friends, my family who live in urban areas don't even really understand this. The fact that, things are getting warmer, folks go, gee, winter's not as bad as it used to be. This is great. And so, for me, my struggle, and even to bring folks up here in the winter, to introduce them to hike, skiing and snowshoeing and those kinds of things is a struggle because, we're not used to those. We've never had access to those kinds of things. I've done work with Curt, and you and the Wild Center and several of the programs up here inspire me, empower me to be able to bring these folks up. But what I am struggling to do is to get people to understand about climate change, that we want to save winter. Why do we want to save winter? It's cold. Who wants to be in the cold? So that's what I hope to be able to convey to folks. One suggestion that I was thinking about as I've been watching the presentations over the past 3 days is how maybe to bring it forward. So we're having warmer winters now. What won't you be able to do if this continues? And bring it into the communities. Okay, so you do these kinds of things in your communities, and if it continues to be like this, will you be able to do those things? So, I think it would be helpful to be able to, at least take them forward a bit more.
Yeah, I'll start, and maybe Jen, if you want to add on as well. But thank you so much, Benita, for introducing that outdoor Afro and other movements too. This is part of connecting in the age of humans. And one of the great lessons I've learned from people like Jen and the Wild Center is that if you do want to get people engaged, it's important to show that it's happening to them where they live, and then find the aspects that are most relevant to them. So, of course, this is a winter sporting event. We're focusing on saving winter. And here in the Adirondacks, winter is part of our heritage. But let's say maybe you're in Baltimore, right? Downtown Baltimore. What do I care about that? Well, the flip side is, as winter shortens, it's because summer's getting more intense and lasting longer. The air quality is going down, the heat waves are going more. It can make the cities more and more intolerable, and especially this brings us to the entire climate justice topic as well. So there are just so many aspects of how climate is affecting the human condition that there are gonna be endless stories that we can tell where we live to show that it's relevant to people in ways that matter to them. So maybe, do you wanna add anything?
Sure. I mean, I think just echoing what Curt said, just that idea of connecting with place is so critical. We worked over the last few years with a number of schools in East Flatbush in Brooklyn, and we did really amazing exchanges between high school students in Brooklyn and high school students up here. And it was, well, I think what was really incredible about that was on both ends, we brought students to New York that had never been to a city before, and we brought young people here that had never been, certainly in the Adirondacks before, and they had a chance to connect on a really personal level and share their own experiences, and they were all interested around climate change. And I remember one young student, after attending a youth climate summit in Brooklyn, saying on the bus on the way home, I used to think that climate change was about me skiing less each year, but now I really realize it's about systemic racism. And I was like, yes. And she was probably 14 years old. And so she really had a chance to connect with those young people in Brooklyn and hear their stories and learn about how climate change was disproportionately impacting those communities. And I think creating those relationships is a way to start and really building from that.
Hi, it's Zoe from Paul Smith College. I see both of you, but since you're together, have a question about working with young people, in particular, what you've seen in terms of the hope that they have or the despair that they're suffering from this issue.
You want to take it first?
It's a really hard time for young people right now. I mean, it's a really hard time for everyone, but I think particularly with young people, coming out of the pandemic and really trying to re-enter the world. There's a lot of mental health issues. There's tons of, research and information coming out about the mental health that is the impact of mental health on young people and how they're feeling, which is a lot of despair and grief. And I think finding ways to hold space for them, finding ways to connect, finding ways to, maybe it is getting out in nature and creating a space where they can be together in a way that's feels connected and fun and restorative, is a way that I think that is really important to consider. I think also there's just so many demands on young people now, and they between the climate crisis, the social injustice that's happening. They just feel the weight of all of that. So again, I think that finding ways to hold space for them and creating places where they can do that and feel safe and included, and that their voices can be heard, and really listening. It is an act of listening, and they may be telling you things that you might not necessarily want to hear, but creating that space to hold that, I think, is really important right now in the space of youth engagement, and finding ways to help support them accessing mental health coping mechanisms for dealing with all of this, and that's part of the hope piece, right? Is finding ways to not Pollyanna things like the climate movement. It's not all roses. It's not going to be great. It isn't great right now, and so trying to find that sort of balance of, let's find a way that we can work together and listening to what the young people want to do, and then supporting them and advocating for them, I think is a really important way that we can help support young people in this movement.
And I'll add on from the world of formal education. I informally survey my students from time to time when we talk about this, and we build the climate topic into the biology class and others as well, and tie that in. And I'll ask students in a show of hands, how many of you feel despair about this? And some hands go up, and then I say, how many of you feel like we've got this, that we have the know-how and this is something we actually can address? And more hands usually go up in the kinds of students we're getting at Paul Smith College anyway. So of course we're a self-selected group in a place like this too, right? So they're coming to become empowered to make the world a better place. And so I gained tremendous hope, not just from the youth climate activities that we do with the Wild Center, but the kinds of students I see at our college and then I think at other places too. And I would say the hope is there, but it's not a naive hope. It's a fierce hope that's backed up and with a respect for science, strong knowledge as a foundation to stand on, to do what is obviously right for a better world. And I think a lot of our students see that.
Thank you both for the documentary. I have to say, it's a topic that's really interesting to me. And one of the things that I really liked in the movie is that very often when people speak about climate change, they're like, scientists speak to us, we don't understand. That's made really easy, and I think that's exactly the type of tool we need to convince people that are still reluctant or not really willing to look into it. I guess that's the point, but that's really cool, and I really like the movie. I had a question. We had a chance to talk yesterday night with Jen and with Bella that gave a presentation on behalf of the athletes of the youth. And for us in FISU, of course, we aim at being a platform for youth because we're dealing with student athletes and not only. And I was wondering, in the event you're organizing this Youth Climate Summit, or I'm not sure if I got the name right, how do you work? Do you work on different topics? If yes, do you have the topic of sports? Because around here, you're a very athletic region. We can see it with the games happening here and the Olympic history, the university sports history. Is there any topic on sports, and is there any, probably not the right wording, but any use of the athletes to spread the message? Because we heard a lot during these couple of days that sport is a great vector to pass on the message with a positive way, not only like bullying people about, yes, you have to be careful, etc., but bring a positive image associated to climate change. Is there anything on that, on those Youth Climate Summit that you're doing?
Maybe could I pile on that too? I'm not sure everybody knows all about the Youth Climate Summit, so maybe just a little bit more stuff.
Sure. So since 2009, the Wild Center's been running these Youth Climate Summits, which are two-day events that bring together high school students, around 150 students from across this region, to learn about climate change science, impacts, and solutions. And we thought we'd only do it for a couple of years, but then all of a sudden it really took off, and here we are in 2023, and we've done 150 youth summits in 22 states and 9 countries. So we've helped inspire this whole movement, and we have a toolkit, a free online toolkit that you can use. That's really a framework for essentially planning and executing a summit. And we've actually had other organizations use it for topics other than climate change. So we've had one done on food, for example. I know there was another organization that was interested in doing something on school bullying using the model that we approach, which is essentially, it's like a conference like this, but mixed in with a lot of hands-on workshops and also an action planning process where young people get together and they create an action plan for their schools and communities. For us, that's around climate change. And we've certainly brought in the theme of winter sport only because it's something that our young people here in this region are really interested in. And I do think that the model itself lends itself to the idea of having a more sport-themed event, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about what that might look like. And it's a great way to connect with young people. We have a group of high school students that help us plan the event, so they really help us think about what the topics are and what workshops we might have. And sports certainly been a part of it, winter in particular, just because that's what's popular here. I'm trying to think if there's been other places around the world. Actually, we have done a youth summit in Finland, and they had people that were in the sporting, because again, the cross-country skiing and that winter culture is very popular there, and so they actually also had speakers come and do workshops on the impacts of climate change on winter. So it kind of varies from region to region, but I could see the model that we've created being very applicable to what you're speaking to.
So I'm looking at the clock here. I think we have time for one more quick one, if anybody would like to. We don't want to go over into the lunch hour for sure, so maybe in the back we got. Ah.
It's me, the guy without the mustache. I first want to say I really appreciate how much of this discussion is around kind of the intersectionality of the climate conversation and how that's becoming more, it's so potent, and it's the intersection with mental health, the intersection with social justice. It's really where we can get so much of this work done. So thanks to everybody here who is digging in on that front. I wanted to ask specifically about the kind of conversation around climate positivity. You brought it up in the end of the film. I keep hearing you kind of mention being positive about, yes, we can do this, versus this, the kind of messaging around like, this is going to destroy us. And I'm just curious for you both, what tools are you using to push forward that climate positivity message, and what are you finding is working well for you?
Yeah. I'll start if you want. Well, I try to come at it from the perspective of a scientist. I study global climate. I've studied on different continents around the world and learning about ecosystems and seeing how people have lived in incredibly harsh climatic conditions around the world too, from the Danakil Depression in Djibouti to other places. So it's not just wishful thinking to say that all is not lost and that we can pull this off. It's not going to be the end of all life on Earth. It's a terrible problem we have, but it's something that we literally, seriously, scientifically, as a force of nature, can do. I mean, like as I said in the film, all this, look at what we've done to the planet, and it was by accident. We did it without even trying. We've changed what the planet looks like from outer space. The shadowed side of it glows in the dark from all of the electricity. We've done that without even trying, having any sense of who we are. Now we know. Just imagine what we can do if we see ourselves as a force of nature and a force for good. So that's just, to me, scientific fact. Another thing is you need to push back on the negativity because it's a strategy coming from the fossil fuel industry. Bill McKibben could tell you about it. I'd want to recommend a book by a climate scientist and friend, Michael Mann. It's called The New Climate Wars. I highly recommend that to you because basically it's gotten too difficult for the fossil fuel industry now to deny the science. The science is so rock solid and multifaceted that the strategy has now shifted. Instead, the money and influence going out to the media, to the politicians, to probably Vladimir Putin for all we know, is that we can't fix it. That we need the fossil fuels, solar and wind won't do the problem. Or we fight among ourselves. Oh, you flew here from so-and-so, you burned a lot of carbon. Oh, you eat meat, and all that kind of stuff, It's not our fault, it's the fossil fuel company. So it's meant to distract us, and especially to make us despair and feel like everything's lost, and it's not. So realize that if you're hearing this doom and gloom stuff, some of it is being aimed at you, and it's not reality. We have a choice to make. We can absolutely do it. There's a million great reasons to make the switch, and we can do it in this lifetime we've got on the planet.
I'm not sure how to follow that. I thank you so much for your comment, Graham. I think that for me, just agreeing with, again, everything Curt says, and also this idea that the solution, we do have solutions at hand, right? And so the challenge is that they're not visible to most of the population. So, and as you spoke to, they're not necessarily accessible. So how do we change those systems? I think making those solutions visible and then trying to leverage and push the levers of that change to make sure that we're coming and talking about climate change from a solutions lens and keeping that as a constant drumbeat and through line. And I think I really appreciated how you were speaking towards that systemic change, that we really needed to be focused on those systems and not let sort of the maybe the climate shame, like people shame, you were kind of getting to that sort of shaming piece of like, well, you flew here, you drove here in a fossil fuel vehicle, like to have that get us down. But that I love the idea of the imperfect advocate. I'm totally gonna call myself that from here on out, if that's okay with you. That, you know, this idea that we can make a difference, not just make a difference in ourselves and help and influence the people that are dearest to us. I mean, you speak to that in the film around our spheres of influence, that the changes we make in our day-to-day lives, not only, they might not change the world, but they change something in us and they change something around us in the people that we connect to in our community every day. And if we can continue to do that and encourage others, that's where I think where it's at.
So thank you for that, Jen, and thank you all too. And I think we'll end here. And welcome to the lunch hour, and welcome to the age of humans.
Thank you so much. Let's give them another round of applause for another great discussion, great film, tremendous conversation.